then, colleagues, shall we make a start? And can I welcome the people from the Older Persons Forum and anybody else that's at the back there that can listen. Item 1 is attendance. There's a sheet going around. 2 is apologies. None. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Linda, I did discuss it with you before. There's no declarations?
Not that I'm aware of, Leader, but of course, if any interests come to mind as members go through the agenda, they can ask for advice or make declarations as we go along. Thank you.
Well, on then to item 4, which is the minutes of the last meeting. We'll go through these page by page. Brian, I'm glad you're present here because you constantly remind me this, and I'm very grateful for it. Right then, item 4, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11. Somebody move the date of true record? Ooh. Right, any matters arising in those minutes? No? Right, thanks for that. We'll move on now then to item 5. Which is action sheet, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Leader. They're there for information.
Any questions of members? If not, then we're moving on to item 6, and this is the budget, and this is Nigel Aurelius. Over to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Leader. I'm told this is a faster laptop. Nothing else has changed. Have the talk faster. Okay, this is the final, he says with his fingers crossed, Cabinet consideration in relation to the budget. So I'll whip straight through. I mean, members are fully conversant with the sort of background to all of this kind of stuff and what we've done so far, so I won't repeat any of that. So we'll go straight into the final budget decisions in relation to 2014-15. 5.1 takes you through some issues we've had in relation to one of the corporate savings we had in there in relation to the minimum revenue provision, where we've hit a little a bump in the road. And although I said at the January Cabinet report we would underwrite it from reserves if it didn't come through in time, I think now, given the uncertainty around it, we should be looking to finance that in some other way. In identifying the alternatives, I've put in there, I thought it was important to neither destabilise the integrity of the budget developed so far, nor to ask any service area to revisit their budgets. I didn't think that would be helpful. So there I've laid out how we're going to bridge that gap of 750,000. We're going to use what was left of utilise an element of the unallocated sum, review the capital financing budget, council tax support budget, all other budgets that sit within finance, other that kind of sit really at the centre, look at the bad debt provision and increase the target saving from non-pay, and that bridges the gap. But as I said at the PDF when we went through this, a lot of the oil and contingency within the budget has effectively gone because of that. So it does put a little bit more risk into the budget, but appropriate in the circumstances. So, assuming that Cabinet then agree that as part of the budget proposals, we're left with 3 things really to consider: the level of council tax increase, what we do in relation to the pensioners grant for 14-15, and the funding for profile and the other miscellaneous issues that could come up. And I've taken members through them in each of the next paragraphs. In terms of council tax, the proposal is that the budget is that we utilise an element of the extra resource we had from the final settlement, and the budget is concluded with a council tax increase for Torfaen of 3.95%. And I've given the figures there, what that will mean and what that will yield in relation to the budget. In terms of the pensioner council tax support, I mean, this was a grant that was unhypothecated right at the end as part of the final settlement. So it's there for you as members to decide what you wish to do. And the proposal in here is that we continue to support for one more year, given it was relatively late in the day that it was announced, and that gives the recipients of the support a year to deal with any shortfall that is created. And because it's only a one-year continuation, we fund that from reserves rather than the base budget, to just help the overall budget. In terms of funding for Profile and then the miscellaneous stuff that was going, well, that was obviously going to be funded originally from the unallocated sum of 210,000. So I'm suggesting we earmark a specific reserve up to the value of 210,000, with 150,000 of that being available for Profile. And then as part of the 2015-16 budget, we put that back in the base budget. It seems the most pragmatic way to resolve the situation as far as I could see. So that's the final budget decisions that will go to Council, providing Cabinet agree them. I've then brought out some risks that still remain. Pay, we're balancing on 1%. We've still got some grants outstanding. We've obviously taken more risk into the budget. And I'm saying we need to protect our reserves so they're used for the purposes for which they're established, which was transformation, change and unforeseen events, and therefore not to address overspends or budget drift. So we're going to have to continue our discipline both in the current year and next year, so that we've got the resilience going forward. Obviously, this budget has meant that when we go into 14-15, my ability to bolster reserves significantly from things within the budget or around the budget, be they the collection fund or unallocated, has been severely reduced. So that's why discipline is important going forward. There's something there about final steps, and obviously that will go to Council on the 4th of March, and at the 4th of March we will consider something around the medium term and set a direction of travel. Nothing further really to bring out in relation to the report, Leader.
Thanks for that, Nigel. Anthony, do you want to make a comment? Or before you do, no? Anthony.
Okay, so just start with a reminder of the economics, really. It's nothing I haven't said before, but I think it's worth drawing out from this report that it mentions that we've got nearly £6 million less funding this year than last, plus pressures of around £5 million caused by rising demand and increased costs and burdens. I think that's worth saying when it comes to considering the council tax rise, because the 3.95% rise will raise around £1.3 million. So that's a long way short of the £11 million of pressures that we have on us. And I think that's important because without that element of council tax, there'd be another £1.3 million of cuts needed, which would mean closures or cuts to vital services and significant job losses. And I think that's worth drawing out at this point. Of course, balanced against that pressure on services, we recognise the need to help keep council tax rises as low as possible for hard-pressed residents. But I think this is the least worst compromise between those two competing considerations, really, the need to protect services and protect employment and to keep the bills as low as possible. And the council tax rise would be around 80p a week on a Band D property. Now, again, this is something I keep coming back to, but I think it's worth drawing out again that a lot of these tough decisions that we're having to make aren't from a situation of our choice. They're the results of cuts coming from elsewhere that are facing councils across the UK. And I think we're seeing it across Wales this year. Other councils are struggling with this same set of difficult decisions and this same balancing act between council tax levels and protecting vital services. Now, in an ideal world, none of the councils would want to increase council tax. And to put in context, if our settlement was the same as last year's, we'd have £6 million more. And obviously, with that kind of money, we could do a lot of things, both in terms of freezing council tax, in terms of things like a living wage that the unions are understandably pressing for, and in terms of avoiding some of the difficult decisions we've had to make around social care, sports pitches, and so on. So, I think that's worth pointing out. But, that this isn't an ideal world, and we need to make the tough decisions that are based on the real world situation that we find ourselves in. Two other provisions that Nigel mentioned that are worth noting. First of all, I think it's right that we've decided to keep the extra support for pensioners this year rather than ending it at very short notice. And secondly, I think it's something that can get sort of overlooked in the sort of the big sort of bullet point decisions of the budget, but I think we're right to make provision for profile. It's something that members have had explained to them in great detail now, and it's something I think that symbolises the fact that we value our staff in terms of wanting to retrain them as and when issues arise with current roles, and in terms of value for money. Our strategy obviously is about avoiding compulsory redundancies, and that's right from a human perspective, but I think it's also right from a value for money perspective, because of course compulsory redundancies do cost money, and if we can spend a bit of money on profile to help oil the system to get our people in the right places and avoid compulsory redundancies, not only do we prevent the negative human impact of redundancies, but we also save on money that way. Lastly, I think it's important to keep the momentum going from here. We've tried to view the budget this year as a continuing process, not just because Nigel and myself love to repeat ourselves and bore everyone to death, but because I think that's the right thing to do, to try and make decisions as early in the year as possible, to leave time for consultation, for consideration, and for proper planning. That can't prevent difficult decisions from having to be made, unfortunately, in the current circumstances, but I think it's better than the alternative.
Right, thanks for that. And you see the recommendations there on 8.1, all agree? Sure. Thanks so much. On now then to item 7. This is insurance. Nigel again.
No, it's Mr. Lilly's making his...
Oh, apologise. Come on then, Mr. Lilly. Nice to see you. Thanks very much, Dave.
Thank you, Leader. Got my equity card yesterday, so here we go. No news. This report is a report for you to consider the placing of our insurance premiums, which are terminating at the end of March this year. Okay. All authorities look to enter into long-term agreements for placing insurance premiums to minimise the administrative burden that annual premium acknowledgements bring. So in November last year, we went out to the OGU market to commence a market tender exercise for all of our insurance cover, and those insurance covers are outlined in paragraph 5.3. A number of lots, 9 in total, covering all of our potential risk factors. We had 6 responses from various tenderers, and you should note that not all of the 6 covered all 9 lots that we went out to tender on. Paragraph 6.1 then just outlines how we evaluated those 6 tender proposals, and we asked the tenderers to submit on a 3+2 basis, so 3 years LTA with an option to extend for a further 2 years. Paragraph 6.3 then outlines how we scored those tenders. So the 6 tenders there, and you can see that not all applied for all tender lots, only tenders 1 and 2. The bold items are the winning tenderers. 6.4 then outlines the financial cost of the winning tenderers, and for all aspects apart from motor, they are within our budgeted sums. The motor insurance is slightly above the budgeted factor by about 5%, and that's really due to a hardening of that particular market. Our claims experience on motor has remained fairly constant, but we've just seen a hardening of the market. Paragraph 6.5 then outlines why there is no financial figure against the SRS computer line, lot 5.5b, and that's because that is a consideration for the SRS board. So that a similar report is going to go to the SRS board for them to agree or not to placement of the insurance, and then that cost will be passed on to Monmouthshire as the financial lead for the SRS. The rest of the report just outlines the consultation and the risks that are in place. The main risk is that we need to get the insurance in place by the 1st of April to ensure that our cover continues. Very quickly, that's it, Leader.
Thanks, Dave. Anybody want to make any comments? Ant? No, you okay?
No, just to thank Dave for the report and to recommend its approval.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, members. First of all, thank you to Elka Winton for writing this report on our behalf. And it's to give you an update on findings of an independent options appraisal undertaken as part of working with WLGA to look at how better can we provide future services in terms of all the strategic housing functions. And we were deliberately working with an independent consultant so that an objective overview would be taken, an option appraisal, to see what are the potential increased benefits of increasing our collaboration with Monmouthshire, and particularly looking at the homelessness and the housing solutions service. So what we're presenting you here is our recommendations, which are based on the recommendations from the independent consultant, to develop a joint housing solutions services based with Monmouthshire and Torfaen. And as you know, we were already co-located and we've already been doing a number of things on a collaborative basis, like reviewing our policies, looking at where we can share services and functions, and this builds on that. And what I'm giving you here is some of the background in terms of the legislation. The Home for Wales White Paper, we're expecting a bill to be approved, get Royal Assent approval during this year, and that sets out a number of expectations for local authorities, and particularly in terms of preventing homelessness. I mean, that's a key feature with more requirements. And we know that demand will increase potentially and our resources will reduce. And strategic housing functions, obviously once you outsource your landlord responsibilities and housing provision, it becomes a much less sustainable service if you don't collaborate with others. And this builds on our collaboration to make sure we are sustainable. So set out at 4.2 there are some of the new responsibilities there, and it's that first one in particular, the achieving a suitable housing solution for all households which are either homeless or threatened, and to try and achieve that within 56 days. Obviously that's quite challenging. And statutory guidance will set out our minimum requirements of support, and they're set out there. Over the page then we've got arrangement in terms of interim accommodation. New regulations that we'll have to comply with that. The last bullet point there, that's worth highlighting, the intentionality test for homelessness families to be removed. And that could create significant demand. I mean, currently, if we can prove that somebody has intentionally made themselves homeless, that duty to provide them support doesn't apply. But under the new legislation, once there are children involved, it links to our safeguarding role, I guess, and our corporate parent role, we will have a duty to provide support and accommodation. We're still waiting some of the details of these new requirements that will be set out in the bill, but we're trying to be setting ourselves up in advance of what we're expecting to come. If I take you then down to 4.5, and the bullet points there, those are the main findings from the WLGA review, and WLGA have been working with all authorities across Wales to help them prepare for the new legislation. And we set out there under those bullet points, there's some of the areas where the main findings of that review have highlighted. And just to highlight there, the private rented stock, I mean, that's why we've been working across Torfaen and Monmouthshire to develop our private landlords forum, because we know we're going to need to work more closely with the private rented sector and landlords, and we want to help landlords be able to, adapt their properties where we have particular needs. And it also links to the next item on the agenda, the empty property strategy. Obviously, we're trying to make sure there's no waste in the system and get empty properties back into use. I'll talk a bit more about that later, but some of those properties could potentially become the future private rented stock. So the two strategies complement each other there. Just building up there under 4.7, a bit of a background on where we've been so far. I mean, you remember in January 2012, we were the first area that co-located our strategic housing functions. And, even at that stage, we'd spoken to other local authorities in the region to see, are there benefits in coming forward on a Gwent-wide basis or a sub-Gwent basis. So, what we're doing now and what we're proposing for the future lends itself into working on a more even wider regional basis. I've set out then some of the areas I've just described, the Landlords Forum, 4.9. That's been a very useful forum to really understand from a landlord's point of view what are the challenges, what are the difficulties, and trying to find some solutions there for them. The other thing we've managed to do is, under 4.9, we've got a private rented centre access officer that we jointly fund. So, we're building on this collaboration. Going back then to the independent review that was conducted, we did an option appraisal, and it looks at those three options there set out in 4.11. And what we're recommending following that option appraisal is that option 3 is the preferred option. And that should make us much more sustainable going forward. Now, there's an ambitious statement in here that the independent consultant has encouraged us to look at the potential for further income generation and possibly becoming self-funding. So that's an aspiration. If we could sell on functions, if you like, to other local authorities. So it's something there that we'll do our best to try and achieve. And building on the wider potential for collaboration across Gwent, there could be some real potential there. Going back onto the issues and findings, one of the areas that we discovered through that research, working with the independent consultants, was we thought seriously about outsourcing the functions. And the evidence tells us that in parts of England where that has been done, they've actually brought those functions back in. It hasn't proven to be as effective as was first desired. So that's led us to believe that option 3 is our preferred option. If Cabinet are minded to agree, obviously we'll need to set up our formal governance arrangements in terms of a memorandum of understanding to get that in place, to make sure we've got everything sorted. And under 7.3 we'll do a detailed business case. And there is potential, because we are forward thinking and we're being proactive, that there could be potential funding available from Welsh Government to help us on this journey. So obviously we'll look for any opportunity to secure some of that funding. So those are all the main points I wanted to highlight. And what I'm looking for is for Cabinet to support us on this recommendation, and then we will start developing the various policies and the memorandum of agreement that we need to put in place to make sure the governance is robust. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sue. Let me bring in Gwennaida first.
Okay. Thank you, Leader. Just a couple of things. As Sue said, we've been in discussion now for 2 years, and we have to prepare for the changes in the housing bill and to restructure the housing option team. The thing is, I know we've been discussing a lot about the recommendations in the Williams report, but we still have to implement the service. So until such a time that is in being, if it ever comes, we need to hopefully have this recommended here today. We already work with Monmouth now on out of hours emergency service, save us money. And also this was part of our budget proposal, so hopefully members will agree the report and recommend that we take option 3.
Cunningham?
Just one point, if I may, Stu, which concerns me actually, and I'm sure you can put it to bed. On the removal of the intentionality test, would this obviously put more pressure on the housing stock for this? And I don't really understand the rationale for that, because it is a difficult area when people declare themselves intentionally homeless. Now, without a proper test, you're not going to know whether they are genuinely homeless or not.
I mean, it will, and that's why I flagged it up, it will put more pressure on us potentially. Obviously, once we do our assessment to see if somebody is homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, if we have strong evidence to suggest they've intentionally made themselves homeless, under the current arrangements, our duty ends there, because we can say, well, you've intentionally done that. Just to jump the housing queue, or just to get, somehow out of an area that you may not want to be in. The new legislation won't enable us to do that, and we will have to provide support when there are children involved. And it's about the safety of children being more important, than the homelessness legislation. It's probably the right thing to do. And, we would never make those decisions lightly. Even in the current arrangements, we would try and do whatever we could to support families. But it may be that those would be the cases that would go to bed and breakfast rather than a housing solution. But as we move forward under the new legislation, those opportunities would be reduced for us. We would have to increase our supply of private rented sector, dedicated homelessness, short-term provision, to make sure families are able to get into those sorts of establishments.
Right, thanks, Lewis.
Yes, obviously I support the report, but you did mention, Sue, that the consultant had recommended selling on some service. You seem to be sceptical about it, and so I'm sceptical about it, and I even don't know much about it. But when they talk about selling on services, I certainly am suspicious of something there. It's a very, very emotive subject, homelessness, and the ward I live in and represent, it's one of the most deprived wards in Torvine. Consequently, we've dealt with it quite a lot over the years, and it's very, very emotive, as I said. So, could you enlarge on what this consultant was proposing? Thanks.
This is where, if we went into a wider collaboration, the potential could be that we could provide services for other local authorities and obviously charge them for those services, and thereby you could become cost neutral, or potentially it could be an income generation. But, I've added that in as a cautionary note so that we do that properly, and it would be done through a business case process, a cost-benefit analysis.
Thanks. Anthony?
Just to welcome what yourself and what Gunnar said, really. I think the collaboration, the partnership approach is the right thing to do, both in terms of value for money and in terms of the quality of the service we can offer people. I think that's a sort of a good sign, and it also includes my favourite two words in the English language, which is self-funding. So I think that the approach is right of working as we do with a lot of things with Monmouthshire in a partnership approach, and hopefully that can reap rewards.
Dave? No, you're on my blind side, you see.
I welcome the report. Anything that enhances our capacity to accommodate the tremendous problem that we have with homelessness. And it's a ticking bomb in many senses, because, quite frankly, I don't think we've addressed this with the earnestness and seriousness that the situation deserves. So anything, including amalgamation with an authority that doesn't necessarily spring to mind as one of the more obvious authorities to amalgamate with on this particular issue. And that's the question, in a sense. I understand the homelessness and the extent of homelessness and the potential for increasing and expanding homelessness in our territory. But what in Monmouthshire? Can you advise us, can you enlighten us as to the extent of the problem there? Because it seems to me, superficially at least, that we are going into this with perhaps more of a problem than maybe Monmouthshire has. And before I finish, I welcome this notion that you'd eschewed this idea of perhaps putting this out to some kind of private consortium, because homelessness and private consortiums don't necessarily juxtapose in any kind of clever way. But the major question is this one about the amalgamation between Torfaen and Monmouthshire, and how does that sit in terms of the respective responsibilities, the respective extent of problem, if you like?
Okay, and it is always a challenge, isn't it? When you're looking at collaboration, you have to do what I describe as that cost-benefit analysis. You know, the worst position would be that we would have equal benefit. The best position would be that we would have gain. And you know, what we've evidenced so far by being in a co-location is you get the benefits of what I describe as being more efficient. We will still spend Torfaen money on Torfaen residents. Monmouthshire will still spend Monmouthshire money on Monmouthshire residents. But if you like, what we're trying to do, it's almost like a mini shared service. It's back office functions. If we can rationalise, I mean, a good example, a real practical example, is where we've commissioned houses to keep for the use of people who are potentially homeless, and we've had voids. We've sold on those voids to Monmouthshire, because Monmouthshire hasn't had the capacity, because their need is lower. Instead of them having to purchase or agree landlord, you know, with landlords long leases that they may not use, they can use some of our empty properties. The income comes to us, it benefits us, but it also benefits Monmouthshire. So that's a real tangible example of their need may be less, but they still have a need. So the benefit for them is we've already built up that good relationship, we've got that good stock. If we don't need all of it, we can sell it to Monmouthshire and potentially others. And, you know, that's part of the income generation potential as we go forward.
So what you're saying is, in a sense, that there is a sense where this co-location will be a positive enhancement in terms of our ability and our capacity to deal with the growing problem of homelessness in Torfaen.
Definitely. It makes us more sustainable, with the potential to get, you know, there's always a balancing act. We keep properties ready for families who are at risk of homelessness. We have to pay for those because the landlords are keeping them empty for us. If you keep too many of them empty for too long, you're wasting public money. But if you close them down, you don't have anything for an emergency. So there's always a balance to keep sufficient numbers of properties available for us so that we can put people who are homeless into them straight away to meet that 56-day requirement. When we know we have additional capacity, rather than give it back to the landlords forum, we can, Monmouthshire and others potentially in the future, can use that capacity. So, you know, we'll make it much more efficient. That money can then be reinvested for different types of properties to support different types of families. And with the new legislation coming in, we'll need more of the house-type property or larger flats rather than single accommodation for perhaps single people.
Okay, thanks. Brian? Moby?
No, I'm fine. Sorry, I don't want to speak now because Councillor Yole has covered the area I wanted to cover. Right.
Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, members. And as I mentioned in the previous report, this is a related report, and it's evidence in where we are trying to really get much smarter in terms of bringing empty properties back into use. And what we're looking for is Cabinet approval to agree that strategy that's attached there as Appendix 3. And, you know, just to give you a bit of the background, we've been, you know, working away trying to encourage and identify properties that would have the potential to come back into use for a number of years now. And we initially had our Empty Hopes initiative, which, you know, we had quite a bit of success on in bringing long-term empty homes back into use, and working very closely with Duncan and his team, environmental health officers, using some of our enforcement procedures, trying to track down some of the owners of properties, so, you know, working with legal colleagues as well. So a real corporate approach, I think, we've established over the last few years. And, you know, it does fit with the Council's commitment in terms of reducing homelessness, supporting vulnerable people. It's all part of that wider strategy. And as I've said there at 4.3, the demand for affordable housing is, you know, really significant in this area, as it is in all of Wales and most of the UK. So anything that's an empty property that could potentially be somebody's home is a waste in terms of public assets. So we're really trying to up our game to make sure we've got any empty properties identified, highlighted, we find out who those owners are, and then take steps to bring them in. And when we you know, met with the public in terms of our housing strategy, one of the things that empty properties do, you know, is set out there at 4.3. You know, it does create an eyesore, so it becomes a target for nuisance and antisocial behaviour, decreasing the value of neighbouring properties, and there is this perception then of undesirable streets or undesirable areas if you have, you know, empty properties all linked together in one or more wards. So, you know, it doesn't help in terms of community safety. It's the obvious housing shortage, and then potentially increasing pressure on further developments on greenfield sites rather than using existing housing stock. The other potential is the loss of revenue. So, you know, if nobody's living in a house, council tax isn't being paid, which then consequently pays for other public services, police, fire, etc. So, you know, empty houses are a much bigger problem than just the empty house. You know, it's those unintended impacts. As I've set up there at 4.4, we're estimating about 400 empty homes, and we've got there on the statistics in Appendix 1, you can see where they are in each of the wards. And that profile is about the ones we call long-term empties for at least 6 months. So so that's 235 at April 2012. The current estimated number is about 331. So that gives you the, you know, a picture of this is not a small issue of 2 or 3 properties. I've given you some of the background there about the previous empty property strategy. I mean, it sat within environmental health under the previous portfolio arrangements with the council. That ended in 2011. And then what we developed in 2012 was a wider housing strategy which included empty houses, and that was established in 2012. So the empty property strategy, if you like, is a subset of the wider housing strategy. And as I've set out there, during the public consultation on that strategy, I mean, empty homes was ranked as the #1 housing priority for local residents. And you can understand why when you know, see some of the issues that empty properties display. Welsh Government also, you know, they've, on the last few years, because of the housing crisis across Wales, they flagged up empty properties as a particular priority, and it will be flagged up as one of those areas to tackle in the white paper. And to support authorities in dealing with that, they developed the Houses into Homes loan scheme. And again, I think we've given you a couple of case examples in that strategy of where that cash and those loan systems has helped to make a real tangible difference to people and properties across Torfaen, and the strategy gives a real good example there of some case studies there. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of what we're trying to achieve with the strategy. I think the document itself is very user-friendly, gives some really good examples of what's been achieved to date, and particularly where we're trying to take a council-wide approach to tackling this problem, using the powers that other parts of the council have, like enforcement, etc., that will you know, make sure we've got a much more joined up and strategic approach, rather than it just being seen as exclusively of sitting within the social care and housing service. And, you know, we've done some really good work with our colleagues, other chief officers and their teams. So I've set out there some of the implications. So, if we don't adopt it, it puts us in terms of risk of not having a strategic framework where we can assess all of our actions against that particular strategic framework, which has a focus on bringing empty properties back in. I've set out there in terms of a financial burden based on public protection budget, because any default work, if properties get into disrepair, that impacts on somebody else's budget in the council. So the more we can do to bring these properties back in, the better it is, for the community, for people who are waiting for houses, and to the council's budget, and not just within housing, but other parts of the council's budgets there. Those were the main areas I wanted to highlight to you. So, in conclusion, the need to have a good strategy for empty properties and bringing them back into use has never been greater. Welsh Government are prioritising it, and it will be set out as requirements and further expectations in the housing bills as they come forward. It makes sense, it's the right thing to do. I'm happy to take any questions, but I'm recommending that Cabinet approve the strategy for us.
Thanks for that, Sue. Gwynaira? Clark?
Right. Okay. Firstly, I would like to thank the author of the report, Joanne Lewis-Jones. This has got to be one of the smallest teams within the housing department. The pictures didn't tell the real story. As you rightly said, the blight on communities is absolutely horrendous. We have one particular street within Torfaen that has 9 empty properties, a variety of properties, shops, old cooperative buildings, pubs. So really it is crucial that we get this strategy in place to allow us to continue on with the good work that's been done. I've seen a marked improvement, and you can see by the pictures what can be achieved, but we need to do more of this. And it's not easy, because I know Joanne is dealing with people that's abroad, and especially if there's been a death in the family and there's disputes with the property. So all of those things are not easy to deal with. But certainly I've seen a marked improvement. I hope it'll continue, because like you say, these properties, these empty properties, could be turned into habitable places for people. Thanks very much, Sue.
Thank you, Gwynaira. Anybody else? Yeah, Dave?
Obviously, putting a strategy in place will speed up, presumably, the process of converting uninhabited properties, empty properties, into affordable properties for people who actually need. And there is a strong demand for these kind of properties. When we talk about speeding up the process, how long would it take? Because it's good in theory, it looks good on paper, and it looks good when you've got somebody as articulate as you presenting the case. But in actual terms, we're talking about a need that is a big demand now. The need is now. And what kind of time span are we looking at?
In reality, several months. And potentially years. I mean, Gwynaira hit on one particular issue we have is, for some that have been empty for a long time, although, a lot of the backlog we've cleared. Even finding out who owns the property, it is a challenge sometimes. And people may move abroad, or it may be left to various members of a family, and you may be in the 3rd generation. Trying to trace who so working with legal, working with land registry, trying to find out who actually owns it. None of these are quick fixes. Once you find the owner, and that's a rare case when we don't know who the actual owner is. But, 1 or 2 of those, that could be several months of work to try and find out. Once you find out who owns it, obviously there is a process of negotiation. If there are issues in terms of their requirements in terms of environmental health, you can take enforcement action, obviously, and that would fit within Duncan's team in terms of sending the EHOs in, putting on an enforcement notice, etc. Those could be done fairly quickly with fines, etc. But what we're trying to do is work with those owners to bring the property back in. So supporting them, encourage them to take advantage of the loans that are available, working with other landlords to try and encourage them to think about becoming a landlord. So if they don't want the property themselves, try and get them to understand the need that other people could benefit from that property. And that's, again, why we've established the Landlords Forum, put them in touch with others who've already converted their properties, who've seen the benefits of using that as a rental income. So you try to persuade them that it's in their interests. They will get support in the background. You can join the Landlords Forum. You know, they're not on their own. I think if you've inherited a property, and many of these people have, they haven't got building skills, they don't have any money. You know, people haven't done this deliberately. They haven't left them go empty for deliberate. So it's about, you know, working with them, encouraging them once we find out who owns them, using enforcement if that is the appropriate approach. But enforcement, if you like, would only... It's almost like a sticking plaster. What we want is a longer-term remedy to get them to take ownership, to sell the benefits to them of making it fit for purpose, use it as rental or selling it on so it becomes suitable for somebody to purchase.
Anybody else? Right, you see the recommendations on 3. All agreed? Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Okay, this should be straightforward. Okay, what I'm looking for is Cabinet approval to award a 3-year contract for independent chair for child protection conferences, independent reviewing officer for looked after children, and independent chair for foster care reviews. And it's unusual the way we've done this, but we've done it purely for efficiency. We've got 3 contracts that end at different times, April, July and October. But in terms of being much more efficient, in terms of tendering, using our commissioning teams, using corporate procurement support, etc., it made sense for us because they were similar sorts of functions to do the tendering process all at the same time. I've given you the background there in terms of the process we followed. We've got a very robust process now in social care and housing. Our tendering is very well supported by corporate colleagues, and we go through a robust process. We use the Sell to Wales website. We, again, at 7.1, useful there to highlight what we always do in social care and housing, is try and make sure whatever the relevant user of the services or the beneficiary, we try and create some sort of way of making sure people can be part of that tendering process. And you can see for this one, we've had a panel of young people being involved in the interview process to make sure that their views were influencing part of the decision-making. Again, because of the vulnerable nature of the people we're supporting through these mechanisms, we put quality as a higher weighting than cost, but obviously cost is still a significant factor. We've set out there the various elements of the quality criteria, which should be self-explanatory by now to members. Under 7.3, I'm advising you there that 3 tenders were received, and we asked for them to express their interest in those various lots: child protection, looked after children, and foster care reviews. So you can see there the scores that were attributed to the various elements. I've also highlighted there the various consultation that has been held internally across the council. And what I'm setting out here is the reason for going down this route of independent chairs. It's Welsh Government expectation that they will be independent, and it does provide for us a much more transparent and objective view of making sure some of the challenging decisions we make relating to fostering, looked after children and child protection are robustly assessed. It gives us, if you like, an additional scrutiny function by having the independent chair there. I've given you some of the financial aspects set out there. and highlighting that there will be a small saving, and we're always grateful for any saving. And you can see from some of the conversation there at the top of this page, we've done some good negotiation with the tenderers since they submitted to try and bring some of those costs back down, because obviously demand is potentially increasing, so we need to keep our individual costs. Hopefully they're self-explanatory. I've set out there some of the risks, and obviously in terms of this being statutory functions, if we don't get robust sharing arrangements in place on a sustainable basis, we'd be failing in our statutory duties. Now, the one I've highlighted there is Tenderer 3 is a newly established company with no track record. But we've done a thorough financial assessment, with corporate finance colleagues. We've done a thorough assessment of their capacity and skills, and we think they are in a very strong position to give us a very good quality and cost-effective service. And what we will do, we'll mitigate against that risk by very proactive contract management. And it's how we operate any new provider coming into the area. If we haven't worked with them before, we always take this very strong hands-on approach to make sure that our money is spent wisely. So subject to Cabinet approval, obviously we'll have the normal contract stand down and the challenge period, and then we'd hope to be able to award the contracts in the timescales for the three of them as we've set out, April, July and October. So hopefully we've demonstrated a very robust and transparent process. A local new company to come in, which again is good in terms of, jobs and employment for a local service. The tenderer number 3 has confirmed they have the capacity to start that service from April. So again, we've really tested them in terms of are they really able to come in and deliver, and we are satisfied that they do have that capability. So those are the recommendations. We approve a 3-year contract to tenderer number 3 for lot 1, tenderer number 1 for lot 2 and 3, commencing in those 3 different periods. And then with an option, as we normally do, subject to satisfactory performance, we'll extend those contracts for a further 2 years to prevent needing to re-tender for those services. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Sue. Any members? If not, all agree the recommendation, please show. Thanks so much. Thank you, Sue.
In terms of how you've wanted to set up the system. In saying that, there are no changes in this report to the decision-making process itself or to the criteria of the grant aid. It is simply around the use of a panel that has been used previously to advise. So that's 2.1, the purpose of the report. If I take you down then to 4.1, where there's some background information about the programme as a whole, setting out what it's achieved and the amount of money that's been allocated. And then perhaps the substantive issues themselves are covered in section 5 of the report. 5.1 just reminds us that in February 2010, the Cabinet approved the use of a panel approach to consult and advise then the executive member and other independent members. And then from that panel's consideration and advice, the decisions then were taken through the then Cabinet Subcommittee for European Affairs. Slight change recorded in 5.2, which in September 2011, we recognised, I think, or you recognised as a panel, that having both an advisory panel and then an executive subcommittee was probably a little bit clumsy for these arrangements, and you delegated the executive decision-making to the external funding subgroup of the Cabinet, and that's where the executive decision-making stays to date. All that happens then from this report, if you accept the recommendations, is that we will remove the requirement to consult with the advisory panel. And that's really sort of outlined in 5.8, where we're making the suggestion that actually, as we are approaching the end of the programme, we need to ensure that we have the most expedient decision-making processes to get through the balance of funding that's left in the most effective way. And then if I take you down to 11.2, that just confirms really that the, if I can get there, the revised approach doesn't relax either the criteria for funding, so you're not making any changes to the requirements that applicants have to have in place to access this funding, nor are you making any changes to the executive approval process. You're simply removing a link in the chain and negating the need for us to have an advisory panel to consult with. And that's the basis of the recommendation in 12.1, Leader.
Rich?
I used to chair the advisory panel. I think Lewis is the chair if it was to go forward, and I wholeheartedly support this report. I think in its day the panel had its use. I do smile when I say that. It wasn't the easiest panel to chair. Independent people had independent minds, and not all of them concurred with each other, so it wasn't the easiest job in the world to do, but it's served its purpose. I think at the time it was important to have that panel. The funding is coming to an end, and now from a useful panel, I believe it would become a bureaucratic machine just to call those panel meetings to mop up these small sums of money. But in saying that, I think it would be remiss not to thank the panel members I certainly served with, and the ones in Lewis when he chaired it, for all the hard work that they did. And in any event, it was a decision of Cabinet, as David has made. So, in effect, other than removing the panel, there is no change. I wholeheartedly support them and thank the panel for the work they did.
Well, David?
Just a point of clarification from the legal side of this, David, you can advise me, and certainly Linda can, I support. I may or may not be a recipient of some of the grants within this panel. None are mentioned, of course, but I am involved in a couple of voluntary organisations that have benefited from grants from the Council. I'm just asking, is it from this particular pot? If so, do I have to declare?
My understanding is that you don't. I'll ask Linda just to clarify. I think that was one of the reasons we withdrew the report and removed the detail of the individual awards.
Yes, I can confirm that the decision that you're being asked to make about the panel today has got nothing to do with the grants that may have been previously approved.
Dave?
I'm all in favour of removing another layer of bureaucracy. That's never been a problem for me, push an open door there. I think very often it stifles progress. But we don't want to be guilty of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Are there any risks of removing this layer?
I wouldn't say there are any risks, particularly in terms of either the assessment process, because that'll still be carried out with officers against the same criteria in the same way. I don't think there are particularly any risks in terms of the speed of decision making. I think that's one of the things that will be speeded up. I think the report just touches on the fact that there may be a perception that we're moving away from more engagement here, and I think that's dealt with, though, really in the debate that you had last time round, by recognising that a greater control over and a greater influence over European funding per se will give you more ability to achieve your own corporate plan objectives. So I think it's just a perceptional issue, and I think as the previous chair has mentioned, actually, I think most people are on record as saying the panel served a very good purpose at the time at which it was convened, and therefore I don't think there are any significant risks involved.
Anybody else? Good.
Yes, I fully support what Richard has already said. You know that the panel needs to be congratulated for all the work they have done. But on item 3, the key messages there, the 4 bullet points, and they say it all, in fact, and there's a need to get this set up as soon as possible, because you will see there's only just over a 12-month left to ensure all the money is spent as wisely as possible and as quickly as possible. Yes.
Anyone else? If not, all agree the cheers. Thanks so much. On now to item 12, which is Christina Harry on vibrant and viable places.
Okay, good morning, members. The purpose of this report is to inform Cabinet of the outcome of our Vibrant and Viable Places bid and also to seek approval of our proposed next steps. You'll recall that Cabinet have approved the submission of our Stage 2 bid, so we were successful to get down to Stage 2, which consisted of 11 local authorities being considered to take forward the next steps of our bid. And I'm pleased to inform you that our bid was successful, and albeit not to the extent that we were asking for. If you recall, we were asking for £13 million from Welsh Government's VVP bid, VVP pot, and that would actually lever in match funding from the private and voluntary sector and also other public sector organisations to give us a total bid of around £78 million, so a significant regeneration programme for the borough. Whilst we didn't get what we were anticipating, I think it's still a very positive outcome, and the sum is still significant, and it does offer us the opportunity to put in place a programme of regeneration projects that will really make a difference to the citizens of Torfaen. So what does that essentially mean for us, the fact that we didn't get the full amount? Well, we need to rescope the project, and the project, if you recall, I've outlined in 3.1 of the report. Just bear with me. The proposed project focused on linking community-first clusters to employment opportunities, which would be provided through improved transport and digital infrastructure. There would be training opportunities and also the delivery of key housing and mixed-use development around Pontypool and the restoration of the Mononbrett Canal. So those projects we are keen to still take forward. We need to engage with Welsh Government, and there is an officer meeting that is taking place later on this week, and we'll have a better idea from that meeting in terms of what we do about rescoping the project. So in terms of what I'm seeking from Cabinet is approval for officers to engage in that dialogue with Welsh Government, and also to rescope the project and bring that back for Cabinet approval along with the grant conditions and offer. Thank you.
Right, thanks. Members? Yeah, real one.
Yes, I've got to congratulate the officers on a first-class application. Although it hadn't come for the full 12 million, we've had 8 million. But cast our minds back to when this was first discussed back last year, when the Minister was visiting Pontypool, and officers and a couple of members met with him in Pontypool. Myself and Councillor John Marshall, who's chair of the Pontypool Regeneration, and we showed him some properties in Pontypool, particularly the redundant old co-op or hyper-value building, whatever you like to call it. And we also showed him the building which the Development Trust had bought and carried out and converted into housing accommodation and commercial property. Now, the council set up that regeneration Pontypool Development Trust about 8 or 9 years ago. Currently, there is no money left in there, and we pointed out the need to him to invest in the Development Trust, and my interpretation of that is exactly what this scheme is all about. Now, there's no mention of that in your rescoping or whatever, so I certainly hope that that is going to be part and parcel of the initiative, because that's what he was here for, that's what it was all about. And also to work with the partners, such as Pontypool Community Council Regeneration of Pontypool, because even though the regeneration in Blaenavon, in Cwmbran and Pontypool, the joint, when it's finished, they still have one in Pontypool where they're still putting their money in Pontypool. So we really need to be working with them and the Development Trust to ensure, as Sue has spoken earlier on about the need for extra homes or whatever. Now, it goes along with the regeneration of Pontypool, bringing more commercial properties into use in Pontypool, but also for a joint use for housing and commercial use. So I certainly hope that that's going to be part and parcel of the rescoping. And I know the Development Trust have asked for an early meeting as soon as possible, because the officer that was designated to take charge of the Development Trust has gone on to bigger and better things, and all congratulations to her on achieving that post, but we really need to get a post filled. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just respond to that. I just want to reiterate what the core objectives of the funding, the VVP funding is, because we still, even though we've got to rescope the project, we still have to ensure that we meet those objectives. And those objectives are improving the viability of failing town centres, so obviously Pontypool would really come into its own there, supporting community first areas, providing new housing, job creation, investment levered in, so the opportunity to lever in third-party investment, and supporting people back into work. So whilst we are looking at rescoping the project, we still need to ensure that we hit those key objectives. And the Development Trust is an integral part of our proposal around Pontypool, and we'll certainly be looking to ensure that all that is retained. And, as we've agreed, I will be bringing a further report back into Cabinet to approve that rescoped project.
Yes, thanks, Christina. A couple of points. Obviously, we need to recognise that we will have to review the initial bid, sadly from 13 down to 8. But I think it's important that the revised programme includes housing. This was a key part of the bid that was put forward to Welsh Government. So I would hope that that is firmly in place there.
Absolutely, and like I just said, it's one of the key requirements of the funding.
David?
First of all, I'm sure it's a first-class bid, and what I understand of it, that's clearly the case. I'm equally sure that the difference between 30 plus and 8.2 million has got nothing at all to do with the quality of the bid, but everything to do with financial circumstances. But this rescoping, forgive me, but rescoping means what? A downsizing the ambition, if you like, of what we're doing. And that's obviously going to have a negative impact when measured against what the long-term future was if we'd have come up with the golden pot. So can you go into a bit more detail in terms of what this rescoping is? Because to me it looks as if it's downsizing and downscaling of your ambitions in this sense.
I think at this stage we don't really know, because we need to have that conversation with Welsh Government, but it could mean one of two things. Firstly, that the project stays as it is, but the funding streams used are different. So, for example, where the gap between 8.2 and the 13 million that we were looking for from Welsh Government, we may be able to find that funding from, say, European funding, for example. Now, that is something that we need to have that dialogue with Welsh Government with, to see what assumptions they've made in putting this funding available, giving us the £8.2 million. The second option is, as you've said, it's reducing the scale of the project. And obviously we would look to do everything in our powers to avoid that, because we strongly believe the bid that we've put in is the right bid for Torfaen, and really we want to take those projects forward. But even if we do reduce the project down, it is still a significant regeneration programme. £8.2 million with match funding, we are talking 50, 60, £60 million project and investment into the borough. So it's one of the two. And obviously we'll be looking to go for the first one, really, just look at other opportunities to lever alternative sources of funding in.
Yeah, I'm gratified to hear that is good news, and the £8.2 million is better than a kick in the teeth. £8.2 million is a large pot of money. We can do a lot of damage with that, in a sense. Forgive my use of the words there. But the reason I asked the question is because I was interested when you were doing the presentation that had we got the 30 plus million, there would be match funding called in that would take it up to 78, 80 million. And clearly that is an enormous pot of money. You can do a lot more bloody damage with that, I'm sure. But notwithstanding the fact that £8.2 million and the extras that might very well pull in, and I understand that you're not in a position to give much more clarity on that, because there are processes that need to be undertaken so far. But there is still, nevertheless, going to be a shortfall between the total amount that was potentially there if we'd have got everything we asked for, and what will ultimately be ours. So good luck. I hope that you have a lot of progress with the discussions going forward, as they say. I think there is a sense where it would be churlish of me not to congratulate you, because clearly there's been a hell of a lot of work gone into this. And £8.2 million, even if the buck stopped there, £8.2 million is a lot of money to start with.
Right, thanks for that. Anybody else? Oh, right. You see the recommendations, all agree? Thanks very much. Now then, we're on to item 13, which is the skate park contract.
Thank you, Leader.
I've got to say, I've had about 10 people explain to me where this is, and I now understand.
Okay. The purpose of this report is to seek approval to award a contract to design and build a concrete skate park in Northfields Recreation Ground, which is off Llanfechwyr Way in Cwmbron. Yeah? Okay. In terms of the background to this, funding has become available through Section 106 funding, which was associated with the St Joseph's Meadow housing development. And we had £210,000 made available to us through Section 106 to allocate towards recreation facilities. As you're aware, there's been a lot of investment and improvement in the Boating Lake over the past couple of years, and we already have a skate park in the Boating Lake park, which is very, very well used. And there is a lot of appetite and a lot of interest from the community, not only locally but also regionally, for this type of activity. So as such, we felt that there was a need to improve the skate park that we have already. So the proposal is to demolish the existing skate park that is in the Boating Lake and to install a new concrete skate park in the new location. The tenders have been sought for the design and build contract, and we've gone through all the tender processes. 4 tenders were received. 2 tenders were excluded because they didn't meet the minimum criteria, and we proceeded with the further 2 tenders on a cost-quality basis, and we are seeking Cabinet approval to award the contract to Company 3 with a contract value of £210,000. If you're minded to approve the report, there's a standstill period which will finish on midnight the 3rd of March, and we can award the contract on the 4th of March, and with a commencement date as soon as possible. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Christine. Any comments? All agree with the report? John? Yep. All agree with the report? Right, thanks for that.
Thank you, Leader. I wonder whether it's worth sitting down. The report is so brief. There is a vacancy, as you know, on the Greater Gwent Cremation Joint Committee. This report is seeking formal approval from Cabinet to fill the vacancy and to appoint Councillor Nigel Davis to serve on that committee.
Right, thanks for that. All agreed? Thanks so much. Thank you very much, Rich.